Today we will be replacing the PCIe extension board on an Octominer X12 ULTRA. So your first steps in replacing the Octominer X12 ULTRA PCIe extension board is, if it's populated with GPUs, of course remove the GPUs. Also need to get this bar out of our way. Internally there are two screws right here, and externally on the other side there are two screws right here. Let's remove this bar first. So before we remove the PCIe extension board, which has 10 of the 12 PCIe slots on it, let's take a quick look at it. It does have a few voltage regulators onto it. You have your main connection over here, which goes to your motherboard, which has your last two PCIe connections on it. And you also have a voltage sensor, which runs this cable back over to the bottom of the fan controller and reports PCIe voltage to it. Also, we have 4 populated PCIe 6-pin powers, which spreads the power out for each one. One here, one here, one here, and one here. So let's disconnect this cable and these 4, and then we'll get to the screws. So on the PCI Express extension board, there are 10 on each side Phillips head screws. So we got 20 screws to remove first. You can either use a standard Phillips head or a low powered high torque Phillips head like this screwdriver, screw gun. Now that we have all the screws out of the board itself, lift up gently on the back end just a little bit and then pull gently outwards with a slight wiggle, and that will disconnect from the main motherboard your adapter right here. Now to install your replacement PCIe extension board is exactly the reverse. Get it in here first. Line up your connector here, keeping this end up a little bit, and just give a little bit of pressure and it snaps right in. Now you can let it down and try to line up the holes. Now to try to keep everything aligned so you have a good connection here, I like to get all 20 screws in first, but not fully seated, just so the threads are grabbing. This way, once we get all the screws in loosely, we can wiggle it around and get everything centered, and then we can tighten everything down. So let's do that. Okay, now that we have all the screws in loosely, you can see we can still wiggle this around, which is what we want. So what we're going to do is just give it a few wiggles and then give it a slight pressure towards the motherboard. While doing that, we're going to torque down these two end screws. This sets the right amount of tension on this connector, and from here on, we will just tighten each pair of these screws, working our way back to the motherboard. Now that our extension board is secure, let's go ahead and reconnect our 4 PCIe 6-pin power. Remembering that the center one was not utilized, but you can run an extra 6-pin power in the future if you have some very power-hungry cards in here, or cards that like to pull more than the 75 watts that are rated for a PCIe slot, such as a 5700 XT. They're notorious for that. And finally, we'll do our voltage sense wire. Now it is fully replaced. It is recommended to start up your Octominer once with no GPUs into it. Make sure that the unit itself functions properly, then start feeding in cards one at a time and test to make sure everything works appropriately.